Hi, my name is Daniel Rothenberg, and I'm the Managing Director of International Projects at the International Human Rights Law Institute at DePaul University College of Law. And I've been asked by Professor Marco Tavanti to talk a little bit about the work that we are doing here at the Institute, and to start off by talking about the work that we do in Iraq and the way in which we got involved in Iraq and the way in which our work there is integrated into questions of human rights and the issue of international conflicts more generally. The issue in Iraq and then the issue more generally. So our institute began working in Iraq we put our first application in 2003 for an international project, and we began the work in 2004. I began directing projects in Iraq in 2005. We've done so many different projects in Iraq, actually, that it's difficult to quickly go through all of them, but I would say briefly the projects break down into projects that are focused on different activities with Iraqi law schools, so creating new courses, having moot courts, doing some infrastructural work, etc. Projects that work with non-governmental organizations and community groups, and those projects tend to be involved in either training NGOs in human rights documentation analysis or working with young women and women's groups. And then the other big category of projects that we've worked on have to do with documenting and analyzing human rights violations. And in that regard, we ran a couple of different funded initiatives that gathered 8,911 detailed narratives of victims of human rights violations, both during the period 1968 to 2003, which is the dominance of the Ba'ath Party and the government of Saddam Hussein, and then from 2003 to when our grant work ended the middle of 2008, which covers the violations committed by a variety of different players in that post-U.S.-led invasion period. So that includes coalition forces, Iraqi government forces, militias from all different sides, Al-Qaeda, etc. So it isn't so easy to answer quickly what is our perspective in relationship to international conflicts, which I was asked to try to respond to. I would say that it is a very interesting, it is complex and interesting to work in conflict environments, because in conflict environments one sees some of the more extreme types of practices that occur anywhere in the world. The sort of extreme acts of brutality that people commit against other people. And I guess you could also say extreme acts of generosity in contexts where people's lives are so severely stressed that to be generous with time and resources is that much more heroic. A decent amount of our work actually focuses on the more disturbing side of what occurs during conflicts. So we have gathered among the world's largest databases on some of the most depressing kinds of actions. We have thousands and thousands of cases of torture, partly because torture was, you could say, the iconic human rights violation of the authoritarian regime of the Iraqi government for 3 decades. We have countless case after case of the way in which state security services committed horrific violations against people in a very systematic fashion. And it's, I would, on the one hand, for those who do human rights work, interesting to try to understand what's going on. On the other hand, it's in a word, just horrific. I personally find working in conflict situations fascinating because it brings up a great deal of complexity of analysis, complexity of emotions. For some people, I suppose it would not be, it would be overwhelming, and the stories that we've gathered in that nature, that component of our work, the material is pretty devastating, and sometimes I'll show this material to people, friends and family and colleagues, and they'll be justifiably horrified and say, how could anybody do this kind of work? And there's a point to that. I do think it's important work, and I think it's important work because it is an element of truth, and I think all of us are drawn to conflicts. If you look at the news, there's always conflicts on the news. If you look at movies that are popular, they're typically full of conflict. I think we're drawn to conflicts for the obvious newsworthy sense of it. It's something important and big that's happening. But also because they provide, they're so enormously stressful that they raise the most profound questions about social order, about governance, about morality. And that is an amazing area to work. And I would say, just to step back for a second from the horrific nature of the work that we do, one of the most incredible aspects of doing work with people who are living through conflict situations, because frankly, my own personal perspective, I have a much easier role in all of this in that I may go and visit conflict situations, but it's by my own choice, and that is certainly not the case for the people that we work with. When we ran our interview projects, we had at our peak about over 60 Iraqi staff, and we had only Iraqi staff working in Iraq, which is atypical for international organizations working in that country. And our staff took enormous risks traveling around the country in the middle of what some call the civil war, certainly a time of extraordinary violence, talking to people who volunteered their stories for no particular benefit other than their interest in having their voices recorded and heard. And it was amazing to be a part of a process like that and to work with people who were committed to documenting the history of their country because they thought it was something worth doing. And within these stories, of course, there are amazing moments of heroism and even beauty, and to some degree the intensity of the conflict circumstance makes those moments that much more profound.